What could be the reason that even though America is the world's largest oil producer, it cannot use all of its own oil even if it wants to? It is somewhat like a farmer who grows crops on his own land, but when he wants to use those crops has to beg someone else for help. We actually live in a world where what we see on the surface and what is happening behind the scenes are not always the same. In the same way, hundreds of thousands of containers travel from China to America every year. But why does America end up dumping so many of those containers instead of sending them back? And in the middle of all this, how did Iran manage to smuggle Boeing 777 aircraft right in front of the eyes of the entire world? So let's find out all about this in today's episode. Millions of ships are sailing across the world's oceans, and our civilization's economy depends on these ships for around 90% of global trade. Thousands of container ships cross massive oceans carrying thousands of containers, and every ship is loaded with thousands of steel boxes. The clothes you wear and the phone you hold in your hand were at some point probably inside one of these boxes. Yes, from a distance it seems simple. Goods arrive in containers, empty containers go back, and everything looks perfectly organized. But in reality, there's a massive imbalance hidden inside this flow, and when you hear about it, you will be shocked. Anyway, China has become the factory of the entire world over the past few decades. Its massive exports, combined with relatively limited imports, have created a huge global trade empire. So when this mountain of containers reaches ports in Europe or America, that is when the real problem begins. When you compare entire European countries with China, their trade profits are relatively small. But in America, the picture is even different. The United States is the world's biggest consumer and imports a huge amount of goods, but it exports far less in comparison. As a result, only around 40% of the containers arriving from China return with goods inside them. But then where do the remaining 60% go? It is not as if all these containers simply return empty, because sending an empty container back to China costs extra money. Each empty container can cost around $3,000 to send back, while also taking up valuable space on a ship. That same space could potentially generate hundreds of thousands of dollars if it were filled with profitable cargo. China can even manufacture a brand new container domestically for only around $2,000, so there is often little incentive to send older containers back. The result is that huge numbers of new containers are made every year, while older ones are left rusting in ports and around cities in other countries. Some people buy them and turn them into cheap warehouses or small homes. Others melt them down and extract the steel, but a huge number of them simply remain unused. These mountains of rusty steel boxes have become a silent symbol of the imbalance hidden inside global trade. At the other end of this global trade system lies America's oil mystery. The United States now produces more oil than any other country in the world, but it cannot completely use all of its own oil. The first reason is the nature of the oil. The oil extracted from American soil is generally lighter and thinner, known as light crude. But many American refineries were built to process heavier and denser crude oil. At one time, the United States imported large amounts of heavier crude from countries such as Mexico and Venezuela. Refineries were designed around that type of oil, and their equipment was built accordingly. But changing that equipment to make it more suitable for processing light crude would require an investment of more than $200 billion. And that kind of transformation cannot happen quickly. So, the United States exports some of its light crude at favorable prices and imports heavier crude from abroad. The second reason is an infrastructure problem. There are not enough pipelines to move oil efficiently from where it is produced to where it needs to be refined. For example, even though Texas has enormous amounts of oil production, there is not enough pipeline infrastructure to move all of that crude to refineries on the East Coast. California also has its own infrastructure limitations, meaning a significant portion of the state's fuel supply depends on imports. So even when oil exists beneath a country's own soil, it does not necessarily mean that the oil can easily reach the right place. Now, if we turn our attention towards the politics of sanctions and blockades, we find another dramatic story. Iran has been under strict US sanctions for many years. It is heavily restricted from buying and selling certain goods involving the United States and its allies. Yet we have seen Iranian airlines operating American Boeing aircraft and European Airbus aircraft. But how is that possible? Every part of this story sounds like something straight out of a thriller movie. In 2024-25, reports emerged that 5 Boeing 777 aircraft had suddenly ended up in Iran. These aircraft had originally belonged to Singapore Airlines. They had spent years abandoned in the Australian desert. Iran could not simply buy them directly because of the sanctions. So, according to reports, an American-based company first purchased the aircraft. Later, on paper, they were shown as being sold to companies in Madagascar and Cambodia. These companies allegedly had no real operational presence and were reportedly used as fronts to bypass sanctions. Once the aircraft were transferred under the names of third parties, they were no longer directly controlled by the original parties. Then, supposedly under the excuse of going for maintenance, the aircraft began flying towards Kenya. But after entering Afghani airspace, their transponders were reportedly switched off, causing them to disappear from tracking systems. Their destination then changed, and they eventually arrived at airports in Iran. By the time other countries understood what had happened, the aircraft had reportedly become part of Iran's airline fleet. Because Iran's name was not directly included in the original transaction documents, the aircraft had reportedly moved through multiple third parties. These events remind us of just how complicated and unpredictable the global economy can be. A decision made somewhere far away can affect your life and mine every single day. So, the next time you hear someone talking about rising oil prices or shortages of products, remember that behind those seemingly simple events lies a complicated story involving ships, laws, trade, sanctions, and international diplomacy.